It was the soft rustle of her veil that kept Lyla steady as she waited, standing alone in the bridal room, clutching the bouquet with trembling fingers that still smelled faintly of peonies and rain. At 28, Lyla had spent years piecing her life back together after her parents' sudden passing, holding down 2 jobs, studying by lamplight, and finally landing her dream position as a project manager at Weston Technologies, a place that felt like a new family when she had none left. And now, on what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, she stood in a white satin gown with pearl beading, waiting for Daniel, the man she thought she knew, the man she trusted to catch her when she fell. Outside, laughter and camera shutters echoed down the hallway as family and friends settled in the tiny church, unaware that in the bridal suite, a woman's world was about to break apart quietly, like thin glass under too much weight. Lyla checked her phone again, looking for a message from Daniel, but nothing came except for an automated text from the florist reminding her to return the vases. The silence in the room became heavy, pressing against her ribs until it felt like she couldn't breathe. Then her phone buzzed once. She grabbed it, hope flashing across her eyes. But the message was short, cold, and final. "I can't do this. I'm sorry." Lyla dropped the phone. The soft clatter on the tiled floor sounded like thunder. Her vision blurred as tears began to stream, streaking her carefully applied makeup. Her mother's voice whispered in her memory, "You are stronger than you know." But Lyla couldn't feel strong now. She sank onto the velvet bench, bouquet dropping beside her, petals scattering across the floor like pieces of a promise broken before it could be kept. In the next room, the music started. Soft piano chords meant to accompany her walk down the aisle, and her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't supposed to be like this. She had believed in forever, believed in the look in Daniel's eyes when he promised her late at night that he would never leave her, that they would build a home together, a life filled with small moments of safety and warmth. But now, she was a bride without a groom, a heart still trying to beat in a body that felt abandoned in every way possible. She heard footsteps at the door and quickly tried to wipe her tears, smudging mascara across her cheeks. It was Mia, her best friend, peeking in with wide, worried eyes. "Lyla, are you okay?" Mia's voice cracked when she saw the empty, crumpled look on Lyla's face. "He's not coming, Mia," Lyla whispered, her voice so soft that it sounded like a prayer lost in the wind. "He left." Mia's hands flew to her mouth as tears filled her eyes too. She crossed the room quickly and pulled Lyla into a hug, holding her as she sobbed, the veil tangling between them, the scent of peonies and salt tears mixing in the small, suffocating room. Outside, the music changed. People were waiting, and the world kept turning. But inside, Lyla's world was still, silent, broken. In the chaos that followed, Mia and a few of Lyla's close friends helped her out of the gown, carefully folding it back into its garment bag. Every rustle of fabric felt like a betrayal, a reminder that she would not walk down the aisle, that the day she dreamed of since she was a little girl had turned into a nightmare she could not wake from. And when Lyla stepped out of the church in a simple blue dress borrowed from Mia, the guests were leaving in confusion, whispering behind their hands, pity in their eyes as they glanced at her. Some offered empty condolences, some avoided looking at her altogether, but none of it mattered. The fairy tale was over before it began, and all Lyla could feel was the heaviness of the silence Daniel left behind. She went home that evening to her small apartment, the walls too quiet, the dress hanging in the corner like a ghost of what could have been. She curled up on the couch, phone in hand, hoping for a message, an explanation, something, but nothing came. She fell asleep to the sound of her own tears, the city lights blinking outside her window like indifferent stars. The next morning, Lyla did what she always did when life tried to break her. She got up, brushed her hair, and went to work. She didn't know what else to do, and the silence of her apartment was too much to bear. At Weston Technologies, she slipped into the flow of reports and meetings, letting the routine distract her from the ache in her chest. She didn't expect anyone to notice the redness around her eyes or the tremor in her hands as she poured herself coffee in the break room, but someone did. Christopher Weston, the 35-year-old CEO, known for his sharp mind and quiet strength, was standing by the window, going through morning reports on his tablet. His gray suit was perfectly tailored, his dark hair slightly tousled, and there was an intensity in his blue eyes that could both comfort and intimidate those around him. Lyla had always respected him from afar, admiring the way he treated every employee with respect, how he remembered everyone's name, even the interns, and how he led with both discipline and kindness. When Christopher glanced up and saw Lyla's swollen eyes, something shifted in his expression. He placed the tablet down and walked over, his steps quiet but firm. "Lyla, are you all right?" His voice was low, steady, the kind that made you feel like you could take a breath even when the world was collapsing. Lyla forced a small smile, but it cracked before it could fully form. "I'm fine, Mr. Weston. Just allergies." The lie was thin, trembling, but it was all she could manage. Christopher looked at her for a moment, his gaze softening, seeing past the mask she was trying to hold. "If you need to take the day off—" "No," Lyla cut in quickly, shaking her head. "I need to work, please." He nodded slowly, respecting her need for normalcy even when he could see she was breaking inside. "All right," he said quietly, "but if you need anything, you let me know." Lyla nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She turned and walked back to her desk, clutching the coffee cup like a lifeline, trying to focus on the numbers on her screen, trying to ignore the way her heart felt like it was falling apart with every beat. What Lyla didn't know was that Christopher kept glancing at her throughout the day, noticing the way she wiped her eyes when she thought no one was looking, the way her shoulders slumped when she thought she was alone, the way she tried so hard to hold herself together when everything inside her was shattering. And that night, while she sat on her couch in the darkness, trying to find pieces of herself in the silence, Christopher Weston sat in his office, the city lights behind him, thinking about the woman who had shown up to work with swollen eyes and a broken spirit, yet still carried herself with quiet grace. He didn't know why, but something in him ached when he thought about her. Maybe it was the way she tried to smile despite the pain, or maybe it was the way she refused to let herself fall apart in front of others. Whatever it was, Christopher felt a promise form quietly in his heart, a promise that he would not let her face the darkness alone. There are moments in life when silence feels louder than any scream. For Lyla, the days after Daniel's betrayal became a fog of silence. She moved through them like a ghost, going through the motions, replying to emails, attending meetings, and forcing herself to keep breathing. At night, the silence in her small apartment pressed against her like a weight she could not escape. She would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the city outside, wishing the numbness would go away, wishing she could understand why Daniel had walked away without a word. She tried to find answers in old texts, in photos where his smile seemed genuine, in the small gifts he had given her on anniversaries, but everything felt like a lie now, and each memory became a blade turning in her heart. She tried to be strong, tried to be the version of herself her mother would have been proud of, but there were nights she cried so hard her pillow was soaked, and she fell asleep from exhaustion rather than peace. And every morning, she got up, wiped away the tears, and went to work. It was in these quiet, painful days that Christopher Weston began to watch over her, not as a CEO monitoring an employee, but as a man who saw a storm in someone's eyes and felt compelled to stand in the rain with them. He noticed how Lyla stayed late, pouring herself into projects with a fierce determination that was both inspiring and heartbreaking. He noticed how she forced herself to smile at colleagues, even when the smile didn't reach her eyes. He noticed how she paused before taking calls, taking a deep breath as if bracing herself to speak, to pretend, to carry on. Christopher had seen many people break under less. In the world of business, he had witnessed ambition crumble, partnerships dissolve, and people lose themselves to the weight of their failures. But there was something about Lyla that defied that pattern. She was shattered, yes, but there was a quiet resilience in her, a fire that refused to die no matter how hard the world tried to smother it. One evening, Christopher found her still at her desk long after the office had emptied, the glow of her screen reflecting on her tired face as she typed. He paused at the door, watching her for a moment before knocking softly. She looked up, startled, quickly brushing a hand over her face to wipe away the tears that had fallen unnoticed. "Mr. Weston," she stammered, standing quickly. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize the time. Lyla, it's okay," he said gently, stepping into the office. His voice was calm, carrying that quiet strength that made people feel seen, made them feel safe. "Sit down." She hesitated, then slowly sank back into her chair, her hands twisting together in her lap. Christopher pulled a chair from the conference table and sat across from her, his eyes studying her face with a softness that surprised her. For a moment, she looked away, ashamed of the vulnerability she could not hide. "You don't have to pretend with me," he said quietly. Her eyes filled again, the tears she had been holding back for days spilling over as she let out a shaky breath. "I'm sorry," she whispered, covering her face with her hands. "Don't be," Christopher replied, his voice firm but kind. "You've been carrying too much alone." His words broke something in her, and for the first time since that terrible day, Lyla let herself cry openly, letting the sobs shake through her as she pressed her hands to her face, shoulders trembling with the weight of all she had tried to hide. Christopher didn't move, didn't interrupt her, didn't try to stop her. He let her grieve, let her release the pain she had held back, let her be human. When her tears slowed, she looked up at him, her eyes red and swollen, her face flushed with the rawness of her emotions. "I'm sorry," she whispered again. He shook his head, offering her a small, reassuring smile. "You have nothing to be sorry for." She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. I don't understand. He left me, and I don't know why. I gave him everything, and he just left." Christopher's expression darkened for a moment, his jaw tightening as he listened. He could see the heartbreak in her eyes, the way she was trying to find a reason for something that had no reason. "Sometimes people leave, not because you did something wrong, but because they don't have the strength to stay," he said softly. His words settled in the room like a warm blanket, comforting her in a way she didn't know she needed. She nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks again, but this time they felt different, like a cleansing rain rather than a storm. "I just feel so humiliated," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "Everyone was there, waiting, and he left me alone." Christopher's eyes softened further, and he leaned forward, his hands resting on his knees as he looked at her. "You have nothing to be ashamed of. The only shame is on him for walking away from someone like you." The sincerity in his voice, the quiet conviction, made her breath catch. For the first time in days, Lyla felt a flicker of warmth in her chest, a tiny light in the darkness that had surrounded her. They sat in silence for a few moments, the hum of the city outside the windows the only sound between them. Christopher finally stood, offering her his hand to help her up. She hesitated for a moment, then placed her hand in his, feeling the strength in his grip, the quiet reassurance that steadied her. "Go home, Lyla," he said gently. "Rest. The work will be here tomorrow." She nodded, standing slowly, her hand still in his for a moment longer before she let go. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded, his eyes holding hers for a moment before she turned to gather her things. As she walked out of the office, she felt his gaze on her, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel alone. That night, Lyla went home and sat on her couch. The apartment still quiet, but the silence felt different now. She looked at the dress hanging in the corner, the ghost of a future that would never come. And instead of letting it break her, she stood and took it down, folding it carefully and placing it in the back of her closet. She was not going to let that day define her. And somewhere in the city, in a high-rise office overlooking the lights of the streets below, Christopher Weston sat at his desk, thinking about Lyla. He didn't know why he felt so protective of her, why her pain had struck something deep within him, but he knew one thing for certain. He was not going to let her fall, not if he could help it. In the days that followed, Lyla found herself moving through the world with a quiet determination she hadn't felt before. It was as if the night she had broken down in front of Christopher had unlocked something inside her, a reminder that she was allowed to feel, to grieve, and to keep moving forward despite the wounds that still ached beneath the surface. Each morning, she stood in front of the mirror, brushing her hair back, applying a touch of lipstick, and whispering softly to herself, "You are not broken. You are becoming." At work, she poured herself into her projects, each report and presentation crafted with a focus that surprised even her. She stayed late, not because she was trying to escape the silence of her apartment, but because she wanted to prove, to herself, to the world, that she was not defined by the moment Daniel left her standing alone. She was not a victim of someone else's weakness. She was the architect of her own future. And as she worked, she began to notice how Christopher's presence had become a quiet comfort in the background of her days. He would check in during meetings with a subtle nod, offering her a small, encouraging smile when she spoke. He would leave handwritten notes of praise on her reports, small affirmations that meant more to her than she could ever say. "Excellent work, Lyla. Proud of your attention to detail." See, those notes were like small sparks of light, reminders that someone saw her efforts, that someone believed in her, even when she struggled to believe in herself. One evening, as she was preparing to leave, Christopher appeared in her doorway, his coat slung over his arm, his tie loosened after a long day. "Heading out?" he asked, his tone casual, but his eyes warm. She nodded, slipping her laptop into her bag. "Yes, just finishing up. Would you mind walking with me for a moment?" he asked. She hesitated, surprised, but nodded. Of course. They stepped into the cool evening air, the city buzzing softly around them as they walked down the sidewalk. The lights of the street lamps cast a golden glow on the pavement, and Lyla found herself breathing more deeply, the fresh air clearing her mind after hours of fluorescent lights and computer screens. "I wanted to thank you," Christopher said, his hands in his pockets as they walked. "Your work these past weeks has been exceptional." She looked at him, surprised. "Thank you. I'm trying to keep up." He stopped, turning to face her, his expression serious but gentle. "You're not just keeping up, Lyla. You're leading." Her breath caught, the words sinking into her like warm sunlight after a long winter. She lowered her gaze, feeling a flush rise to her cheeks. "That means a lot. Thank you." He nodded, watching her with that calm, steady gaze that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't in a long time. "Can I ask you something?" he said after a moment. She nodded, looking back at him. "Why are you still wearing the ring?" he asked softly, glancing at her hand. She looked down at the engagement ring still on her finger, the diamond catching the light as it always did, a cold reminder of promises broken. She had worn it out of habit, out of fear of what taking it off would mean, out of a stubborn refusal to let go of a future she had once believed in. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Maybe because I'm afraid of what it will feel like when it's gone." Christopher nodded slowly, his eyes understanding. "When you're ready, you'll take it off. Not for anyone else, but for yourself." They stood in silence for a moment, the sounds of the city washing over them, a reminder that life moved forward no matter how much pain tried to hold them in place. That night, Lyla went home and sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the ring on her finger. She turned it slowly, watching how the light refracted through the diamond, remembering the day Daniel had slipped it onto her hand with promises of forever. And then she remembered the day he walked away. With trembling fingers, she pulled the ring from her finger, holding it in her palm for a long moment, feeling the weight of it, the memories, the grief, and then, with a deep breath, she placed it in the small velvet box on her dresser, closing it softly. She felt lighter. The next morning when she arrived at work, Christopher noticed immediately. His eyes flickered to her hand, and when he saw the ring was gone, he gave her a small, proud nod. It was a moment that passed between them without words, but it meant everything. Over the following weeks, Christopher and Lyla found themselves spending more time together, not out of obligation, but out of a quiet, mutual respect that had grown into something deeper. They would work late on projects, sharing coffee and quiet laughter, the lines between CEO and employee blurring into something more human. One evening, after a particularly long day, Christopher suggested they get dinner. "You need a break, Lyla," he said, smiling softly. She hesitated, but the warmth in his eyes made her nod. "Okay." They went to a small Italian restaurant tucked away on a quiet street, the kind of place with warm lighting and the comforting scent of fresh bread in the air. They talked about work, about life, about dreams that had been paused but never forgotten. Lyla found herself laughing, truly laughing, for the first time in what felt like forever. Christopher listened to her with genuine interest, his eyes lighting up when she spoke about her love for art, her desire to one day open a small gallery of her own. "You should do it," he said simply. She shook her head, smiling sadly. "It's just a dream." "All dreams start somewhere," he replied, "and you have the strength to make it happen." His faith in her was something she hadn't realized she needed, and it warmed her from the inside out. As they walked out of the restaurant, the night air cool against their skin, Christopher turned to her, his expression soft but serious. "Lyla, I know you've been through a lot. I know you're still healing, but I need you to know something." She looked up at him, her heart beating faster. "You're not alone anymore," he said. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they were not from pain. They were from the quiet relief of being seen, of being valued, of knowing that someone cared. And in that moment, under the soft glow of the streetlights, Lyla allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, her story wasn't over. That maybe the pain she had endured was the beginning of something new, something stronger, something built not on empty promises, but on the quiet, steady foundation of trust and respect. And as Christopher gently took her hand, she realized that sometimes the people who walk into your life when you are at your lowest are the ones who help you rise. The days turned into weeks, and Lyla found herself navigating the delicate path between healing and hope. The rhythm of her days became a quiet song. Work, coffee breaks with Christopher, long evenings where she allowed herself to paint again, letting colors tell the stories she could not yet speak aloud. Each brushstroke was a prayer, each canvas a confession of the emotions she had locked away for too long. At the office, people began to notice the change in her. Her steps were lighter, her smiles came more easily, and her confidence returned with every project she completed under Christopher's mentorship. She started attending meetings with a new poise, her voice no longer trembling when she presented ideas. She noticed Christopher watching her during these moments, a quiet pride in his eyes that gave her strength. But beneath the progress, there were moments when the shadows of her past still reached for her. One afternoon, Lyla was in the break room pouring herself a cup of tea when she overheard a few colleagues whispering, "Did you hear what happened to her? Left at the altar. Can you imagine?" Another voice chimed in, "Now she's getting cozy with the CEO." Lyla froze, the cup trembling in her hands. The familiar sting of shame washed over her, threatening to pull her back into the dark place she had fought so hard to leave. She placed the cup down and stepped out, her breath shaky as she retreated to the bathroom, locking herself in a stall. As tears welled in her eyes, she pressed her hand to her mouth to muffle the sob that escaped, the walls closing in as the voices replayed in her mind. The humiliation of that day at the altar, the whispers that followed, the pitying looks, it all felt fresh again, like an open wound. A soft knock came on the door, pulling her back. "Lyla, it's me." Christopher's voice came gently through the door. She wiped her tears quickly, trying to steady her voice. "I'm fine." "You don't have to be," he said quietly. She hesitated before unlocking the door, finding him standing there, his eyes filled with concern but not pity. The way he looked at her was different. It wasn't the look of someone seeing a broken woman. It was the look of someone seeing her strength, even when she couldn't see it herself. "I heard what happened," he said softly. "It's fine," she whispered, her eyes dropping. "People talk." Christopher took a breath, stepping closer. "Let them. They don't know you. They don't know what you've survived." Her eyes lifted to meet his, tears glistening. It's hard, she admitted. Some days, it feels like I'm moving forward. And other days, it feels like I'm still that girl waiting for someone who never came. He nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. Healing isn't linear, Lyla. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. She exhaled shakily, the weight in her chest easing. Thank you, she whispered. They stood there in the quiet for a moment before Christopher offered a gentle smile. Come on, I have something to show you. They left the building, stepping into the late afternoon sunlight. He led her to a small park nearby, where the golden light filtered through the trees, painting the world in warm hues. They sat on a bench, and for a while, they just watched the world move around them. Children laughing, leaves rustling, the distant hum of the city fading into the background. I come here when I need to breathe, Christopher said softly, when the weight of everything gets too heavy. She looked at him, seeing not the CEO, but the man who carried burdens she didn't yet know. What do you carry, Christopher? She asked gently. He looked out at the park, his jaw tightening slightly before he sighed. Expectations. Legacy. People think being in charge means you have it all together, but some days it's lonely at the top. She nodded, understanding in a way she hadn't before. You're not alone, she said softly, echoing his words to her. He turned to her, a small, grateful smile on his lips. Neither are you. They sat in silence, the kind of silence that felt comforting, like a soft blanket wrapped around wounds not yet fully healed. She realized then that connection wasn't always about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. Sometimes it was about showing up, sitting beside someone in their pain, and letting them know they didn't have to face it alone. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange, Lyla felt something inside her shift. She realized that her worth was not tied to the opinions of others or the actions of a man who couldn't see her value. It was not determined by the whispers in the break room or the judgment in passing glances. Her worth was hers to claim, and she was finally ready to embrace it. That night, Lyla returned home and pulled out her paints again. She worked late into the night, creating a piece that was unlike anything she had ever made. It was raw, emotional, filled with the chaos of pain and the quiet hope of healing. When she stepped back to look at it, tears filled her eyes. But this time, they were tears of release. The next morning, she walked into the office with a quiet confidence. Her head held high, she greeted her colleagues with a soft smile, unbothered by the whispers she could still hear. She found her place, not just in the office, but within herself. Christopher noticed the change immediately, his eyes meeting hers with a silent, proud acknowledgement. Throughout the day, they worked together, their conversations filled with laughter and ease, a stark contrast to the tension that had once hung around her like a heavy cloud. Later that evening, as they prepared to leave, Christopher stopped her. Lyla, would you consider joining me at a charity gala this weekend? He asked, his voice cautious but hopeful. She paused, surprised. As your date? He smiled, a gentle warmth in his eyes. As my guest. Lyla felt a flutter in her chest, the hesitation mixing with excitement. She thought of the whispers, the judgments, and then she thought of the promise she had made to herself, to live boldly, to reclaim her life. She smiled softly. I'd love that. As she left the building, the city lights twinkling around her, Lyla felt the beginnings of a new chapter unfolding, one where she was no longer defined by the hurt of her past, but by the strength of her present and the promise of her future. For the first time in a long time, Lyla was not just surviving, she was living. The night of the charity gala arrived, a moment Lyla had once thought would be impossible to face. The glittering ballroom was filled with the city's elite, philanthropists, business leaders, socialites, yet all Lyla felt was the quiet strength growing inside her. She had chosen this night to reclaim her story, to stand in her power, not as a victim, but as a woman who had survived heartbreak and was ready to embrace joy. Christopher greeted her at the entrance, his usual calm demeanor softened by a genuine smile that reached his eyes. He extended his hand, and she took it with a newfound confidence. As they walked into the ballroom together, cameras flashed. Whispers floated through the crowd, but none of it fazed Lyla. She was no longer defined by gossip or pain. She was defined by the resilience she carried in her heart. Throughout the evening, they moved among the guests, talking about the causes close to their hearts. Lyla found herself engaged in meaningful conversations, her voice steady and sure. People were drawn not only to her beauty, but to the grace with which she carried herself. She realized then that true strength came not from hiding scars, but from embracing them and letting them fuel your courage. Christopher introduced her to influential leaders, praising her insight and dedication. It was clear to everyone that their connection was more than just professional. It was a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine care. As the gala reached its crescendo, Christopher took the stage to deliver a speech about the power of hope and the importance of standing with those who face adversity. He spoke about second chances and the beauty of new beginnings, words that seemed to echo Lyla's own journey. When he finished, he stepped down and returned to her side, whispering, "This night is just the beginning." The weeks that followed brought new opportunities for Lyla. With Christopher's support, she began organizing community art programs that helped women heal through creative expression. The foundation they started together became a beacon of hope for many, a place where stories like hers were honored and transformed into strength. Meanwhile, Christopher remained by her side, not just as a mentor or boss, but as a friend and partner. Their relationship grew naturally, built on trust and shared dreams. He learned about her past, listened to her fears, and celebrated her victories. Lyla, in turn, saw beyond his CEO title to the man who carried his own burdens, but chose kindness over power. One evening, as they walked along the city's waterfront, the skyline glowing behind them, Christopher stopped and turned to her. "Lyla," he said softly, "you've changed my life in ways I never imagined. You've taught me what it means to truly see someone, not just their success, but their soul." Her eyes glistened with tears as she replied, "You showed me that even after the darkest storms, the sun can rise again. I'm ready to believe in us." They embraced, a quiet promise passing between them, a promise of love, respect, and healing. In the months and years that followed, Lyla blossomed. She exhibited her art in galleries, spoke at events, and became a mentor to young women facing similar struggles. Her story inspired countless others, proving that even the deepest wounds could become the foundation for something beautiful. Christopher and Lyla's relationship stood as a testament to the power of compassion and resilience. They navigated challenges, celebrated joys, and built a life grounded in honesty and support. The memory of the man who left her at the altar became a distant shadow, a painful chapter that no longer held power over her. She had rewritten her story, one where heartbreak gave way to healing, where loss made room for love. One quiet morning, as sunlight streamed through their shared apartment window, Lyla looked at Christopher and smiled. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me when I felt invisible." He kissed her forehead gently. "Thank you for teaching me how to love without fear." Their journey was far from perfect, but it was theirs, real, raw, and filled with hope. And in that hope, they found their forever.